And now for a special commitment announcement, please welcome Jay Cohen-Gilbert, co-founder of B-Lab, and Allison Omens, Managing Director at Just Capital, along with members of Imperative 21.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Excellent. So the imperative of the 21st century, as Ajay said, there's one big, overwhelming objective, one big goal. But I'm not sure that he got it exactly right. A lot of speakers over the course of the day have been talking about the call to leadership and applauding the leadership of individual CEOs. And that is incredibly important, because without them, we don't have the proof points of what's possible to create an economic system that works for everybody. But the imperative, as a number of speakers have pointed out, is that the system actually isn't designed to support that kind of leadership today. I think Dan talked earlier about poverty-stricken communities and pointed out that there aren't such things as poverty-stricken communities. There are poverty-structured communities. And we highlighted Raj Shah from Rockefeller also talked about that we need to look at the intersection between our political environment, our government, the public sector, and the private sector to build an economy that works for everybody. Those are systemic and structural issues. And the commitment that we're all here to make today is to say that there is a big milestone taking place in this business movement as we move from a 20th century evolution of capitalism that's been focused on the maximization of shareholder value to a 21st century era of capitalism that's focused on creating value for all stakeholders and for the long term. And that shift not only requires the type of leadership that many folks on stage have talked about and exhibited in their own companies, and that Andrea talked about. And what she's absolutely right about is that this is our moment. We're fortunate enough to be born at an inflection point in human history that may actually define not just our generation, but generations to come. And the call to leadership is now, but the call to leadership is not only to lead in our individual organizations, but as Mike said earlier today, it's for radical collaboration across sectors, across businesses, and that radical collaboration has to raise our games up a level, not just to help our individual businesses succeed for the long term, or even our industries, but to actually change the structural environment in which those investment decisions and in which those other boardroom operating decisions are made. And so Imperative 21 is a coalition of 6 business organizations that have been around for more than a decade each. B-Lab, the nonprofit behind the B Corp community, the B Team and all the B Team leaders, CECP, corporate executives, chief executives for corporate purpose, the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, Conscious Capitalism, and Just Capital. These organizations together represent over 72,000 businesses across 80 countries, 150 different industries, have well over 18 million employees, nearly $7 trillion in combined revenues, and over $15 trillion in assets under management. It's an unprecedented coalition of business networks that have come together to raise our ambition, not just to help our individual CEOs succeed, we'll do that for sure, but to actually bring their voices together to help shift culture so that the pushback on the BRT from different business publications or other people within the business community lessens, so there's less of a headwind culturally for this type of leadership, and also so that the incentives are aligned for this type of leadership, which means engaging in that public-private partnership that Raj Shah talked about. So we are extremely excited here to be invited here by Aspen and MasterCard to announce the formation of this coalition, and my colleagues from all these organizations and Allison Omens from Just Capital are going to share a little bit about our strategy going forward.
Thank you, Jay. So what does it actually mean to be forming a commitment in a coalition of 6 groups who have decades of experience working with businesses and working with the system to work to change it? we're sort of focusing on 3 vectors of change. The first is individual corporate leadership. We've heard a lot today about the importance of CEOs and other business leaders, finance, across the market and civil society, standing up and saying we believe in a new form of capitalism and that this makes business sense, this makes sense for our own companies to be making choices that prioritize our stakeholders, that prioritize our workers, our communities, the environment in which we operate. So the first is individual leadership. The second is shifting the cultural narrative. We've heard a lot and talked a lot, Jean Case this morning, talking about the need to actually shift culture to be celebrating an environment and companies that are stakeholder driven, that are thinking about all of the various pieces of their business operations. So individual corporate leadership, shifting cultural norms, and then the third is institutions. To change and balance the system, we know that we need to both change laws and change the culture. So this third area will be focused on public policy changes, as well as more broadly understanding the current incentive structures and realigning incentives to be aligned with what choices companies and individual leaders want to be making, but may be constrained by in the current policy, regulatory environment, et cetera. So what is our sort of collective North Star? We're looking at 3 factors. The first is that corporate leadership needs to be incentivized and be operating in the long term. So we all know, and we've talked a lot about shareholder primacy, we need to be moving away from short-term quarterly earnings and conversations about quarters into what does a long-term holistic business performance look like today. The second is measuring what matters. We talked about data this morning. We talked about defining what corporate leadership looks like in the 21st century. That includes things like how do you treat your employees, like what is your environmental impact, as well as financial performance. And so we need to be realigning what it means to be a successful business in the 21st century. The third is stakeholder governance, the conversation that was just had on stage, that Business Roundtable really elevated, that B Labs and others have been really talking about for a long time, which is running companies that are stakeholder driven, that do align and measure all of their various stakeholders, from workers to communities to, to environments. So with that, we'd like to say that we welcome and ask you to join us in this movement. So much of the conversation that's been had today about inclusive growth and systems change, we all know that we need to hold hands and be creating together what the 21st century imperative looks like. You know, we've heard that word a lot today. So we're just excited to be in this room and welcome your partnership moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.